各位观众朋友们，大家好，欢迎收看 JxJ 论坛，由我 Jim Noteware 马健与我们的好朋友 Jim Noteware 为我们一起讨论这个礼拜的时事。Jim, how are you?
Hey, Jimmy, I'm fine. I continue to think every week nothing can get any more bizarre that we've seen it all. But every week it does get more bizarre. and I'm continually astounded that we have not seen it all. Not only are things getting more significant, but they're more surprising. Like the events of a couple of weeks ago, the collapse of the Afghan army, and the events of this week, General Milley taking the law into his own hands and calling his counterpart in China. Who can believe this? Everybody I know say, I really hope it did not happen. I hope it did not happen.
No, Fox News proved it happened. It happened.
But I think it did happen. Yeah. And the other proof, Fox News, I'm glad to hear you say that, but the other proof is he has not denied it.
Jim.
No one is saying he didn't do it.
I perfectly do not agree with what you said of taking the law into his own hands. I think he's a true patriot and a real American because of Mr. Trump's unpredictable and his big lie and the fact that China, I mean, even the Joint Chiefs of Staff doesn't believe him that he will start a war to deflect. And he had to reassure his counterpart to not start World War III. And that's for the benefit of all citizens in the world. I think he did a great thing. And that shows you what a mess and how chaotic it is at the end of the days for White House. It is a shame we have to come to this.
Well, things may have been a mess, but his behavior was treason.
Mr. Trump's behavior was treasonous.
No. If he didn't like Mr. Trump's behavior, as a simple solution, he resigns. And then he can say whatever he wants.
Sir, he saved countless lives by reassuring his counterpart, by saying, I will call you if we're going to attack. We're not attacking. Yes, Mr. Trump is posing. He's been saying crazy things. But, I mean, he did incite a resurrection. He did. That is treason.
Trivial compared.
The Republicans are treasonous.
If he did incite it, none of that's been proven. But
it's not proven. Even now, is not proven.
No, I don't think that he incited it. No, I don't think that's been proven.
Okay, you know what, Jim? This is why Trump he did the poison still lasts till now. Insidious. It's a cancer. The divide he creates, the inability for us. We're drawing a line, and we have to go to party loyalty. No, I don't care what party. If he's a Democrat, he's still treasonous. What he did is absolutely treasonous. He needs to be in jail, and it's a shame he's not. It's a shame. I mean, what happened to Hillary's email gate? They proved nothing. What happened to Biden's son? What happened to Obama's birth gate? All these controversies to create this conspiracy has been proven wrong. But Mr. Trump, what he did is absolutely is on tape, is recorded, it is proven. I mean, the Republicans know what happened. But you know what? All for votes, all to maintain power. Last week, we talked about it. Politicians, instead of doing it for the greater group, good, instead of doing it for the majority or even the minority, like past presidents have done, instead of that, is all to pander to your core voters only. You know what, Jim? We could spend 30 minutes disagreeing on it. I choose not to because they will never end. We have to live because I can tell you right now, what is in the White House is so far from my mind. The fact that I grew up here in Sugar Land, Texas, down the street from my current residence in Commonwealth. Now I'm in Avalon. 40 years, we have never lost power for more than a few hours. Through the freeze in February, through Rita, through Ike, we've never lost power. And this week, Hurricane Nicholas came. The street next to us had power. The house next to us didn't have any wind damage. But our house, torn up, trees popped up over. It looked like a tornado came through. And we lost power for almost 40 hours. And I did not, get a generator. I did not even make backup plans because I will be back. And then a few hours into a day turns into two. I'm not going to complain. I understand Louisiana had an issue. A lot of people pros went there to help. And a lot of my neighbors and friends saying, look at the decay for infrastructure. Look at what's going on. I'm speechless because without power, it really disrupted our lives. It shows us how fortunate we are. I couldn't work. Modem doesn't work. Router, the food and all it's melted. The kids have no school. Even now, the power came on last night, but the school is not turned. Middle school is not on because they still have no power. This is ridiculous. We're like a third world country now.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. We had the same problem 6 months ago during the freeze.
Yeah,
and this time we only lost power for 15 hours. It was a bit inconvenient, but nothing serious. But we lost power for 4 or 5 days last time, and it's inexplicable. Why did? It's inexplicable that it went down. It is inexplicable why it didn't come back up.
No, it's explainable during the freeze. We know what happened with the state, with Austin, with Abbott, and with our states. You know what? We talked about it before. It's very disappointing. It's we need to do better. And you know what? Speaking of doing better, I really want to discuss what you sent me. I mean, about this points. I mean, do you mind if you want to kind of tell our audience a little bit?
I'm happy to do it. Let me give your audience here a little bit. This is an observation about the steps that democracy goes through. And here in the United States, of course, we take democracy very, very seriously, for good and for bad. But what this says, this is an analysis that was prepared in 1787, just about the time the United States was being formed. And it was prepared by a gentleman named Alexander Tyler, a Scottish professor of history at the University of Edinburgh. And he had done research about the fall of the Athenian Republic in Greece 2,000 years earlier. And here's what he said. This is really a timeless observation. A democracy is always temporary in nature. It simply cannot exist as a permanent form of government. A democracy will continue to exist up until the time that voters discover they can vote themselves generous gifts from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates who promise the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that every democracy will finally collapse due to loose fiscal policy, which is always followed by dictatorship. The average age of the world's greatest civilizations from the beginning of history has been about 200 years. During those, now, before I go on, and I will go on in a moment, about exactly what has been going on in the United States and with our observations about several other countries around the world. And we are very afraid that Mr. Tyler's observations are correct, that even people who call themselves fiscal conservatives and have been warning about this public behavior now are voting themselves generous gifts from the public treasury. And the majority of voters are voting for those who greatest amount of gifts from the public treasury. For instance, look at what is happening in Washington today. Now, to go on, Mr. Tyler says, during the 200 years, and remember, the United States is about 250 now. So if all of this is correct, we're due for what Jimmy and his friends in the stock market call a correction. This is a very big correction. But during the 200 years before other democracies have collapsed, those nations always progress through the following sequence. Please bear with me, listen carefully. Number one, from bondage to spiritual faith. Two, from spiritual faith faith to great courage. 3, from courage to liberty. 4, from liberty to abundance. 5, from abundance to complacency. 6, from complacency to apathy. 7, from apathy to dependence. And 8, from dependence back into bondage. And that is why many of us are so afraid, and why Mr. Tyler's words resonate so well with us, because they provide the framework for our feelings to be expressed. And as I read this for the first time last week, I could chart the history of the United States through each one of these phases. From bondage to spiritual faith was actually the creation of the United States prior to the U.S. Revolution. The U.S. Revolution was from spiritual faith under one God to great courage, initiating the revolution, initiating all the things that created manifest destiny that put the United States together. From courage to liberty, beginning with the U.S. Civil War that freed the slaves, created liberty all through giving women to the vote in the 1920s. From liberty to abundance, that's really the latter part of the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution, through the early part, most of the 20th century, abundance. Why is the rest of the world interested in following the United States? Because our capitalist form of economy created abundance, and that we enjoy it. Number 5, from abundance to complacency. I hate to admit it, but the beginning of the second half of the 20th century, mostly my life, people of my generation have become complacent because we have grown up with overwhelming abundance.
I'd like to add in really quick. Your generation is the baby boomers, and I think it's the greatest generation.
Yeah.
After the greatest generation is World War II. But the baby boomers, to me, are the ones that created this abundance. But you want to talk about apathy, you want to talk about complacency, we should talk about the millennials, or even my generation. But that's coming up next. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And that's what's coming now. From complacency to apathy, which is where we are really right now. I have a very good friend who was just retired from politics. He was in elective office for over 30 years. His name is Steve Raddick, here locally. And he has said for as long as I can remember in our relationship, our greatest problem is apathy. People simply don't care. The people blame our elected officials for a lot of things, and they're worthy of that blame, don't get me wrong. But we are to blame because we do not hold them accountable and replace them. We have lost our own discipline. And when you go back and look, it's not only fiscal matters, it's matters of education, of healthcare, of public safety. We have let our public officials and the bureaucrats that support them run amok because it's difficult to manage and it's difficult to provide oversight. Now, where most of us are really afraid is where we're going, number 7, from apathy to dependence. And in my time in politics and in government, I see this happening literally right before my eyes. And it's happening at a faster rate, etc. And while I am a big believer in what Mr. Tyler wrote, there's 2 big corollaries here. Number 1, we are moving quickly from 6 to 7, from apathy to dependence, very quickly, which then tells me that the half-life of every step is quickening. If you notice early in my discussion, I said the early years were 50, 75 years. Then they shortened to 25 to 50 years. Now they're shortening to 10 years or less. And Jimmy, what you just said, the greatest generation to my generation, the baby boomers, now to the millennials, we're measuring time, not in centuries, but in generations. It's shortening. And so if we're not careful, we'll see the end very quickly. That dependence back into bondage. But I really hope, and that's why conversations like this and programs like this are so very important, Jimmy, and I value our relationship, is because maybe through open discussion and sharing, we can see the error of our ways and motivate ourselves to make genuine corrections. I hope. And it's getting more and more difficult to do so. But you've been patient listening to me and listening to this.
Yeah, it's therapeutic. You know, by the way, you are great at telling a story. It's therapeutic to listen to you. Listen, Jim, this is written 250 years ago, around the time our Constitution was written. Look at how on point it is. And what you said about this, learning from history. That's the problem with human beings. A lot of us refuse to read history, to learn. The one thing me and you know is we want to not repeat. History shows us many things. Everything that's happened that we will see has happened before throughout time. We can avoid the pitfalls, whether it's trading or it's the stock market, whether it's investing in real estate, whether it's politics or human trajectory. The fact is we refuse. We always think that turn out, we pray for the best and prepare for the worst, but not anymore. And I don't want to start with my generation or your generation or the next generation. We're not those type of people that are saying my generation is better than the next. I understand where the next generation comes from. I understand their challenges because the generations above me, my parents, my grandparents, they'll tell me stories. Oh, we didn't have food back then. How poor it is. Those are all true. But every generation has its own pitfall. But I can tell you one thing right now. This myth that has been perpetrated, that if you work hard, if you're kind, if you have discipline, you will make it. If you grew up in USSR in the 50s and 60s, or you're in China, I don't care how smart you are, how hard you work, and how kind you are, you're not going to make it. The society, the structure, the opportunities given to you by a stable government, by a stable country, that is the key to success, period. So basically, it's the gene lottery. It's a sperm lottery. Who are you born into? Where were you born? During what time were you born? It has luck.
It has a lot to do with it. And
so much luck.
You're talking about which country you're born in, which of course is extremely important. But then you come down to even the micro factors like who were your parents?
Exactly. Who were you born to?
What were your parents' values?
What did they teach you? Were they able to provide
you as you were?
This is why I'm thankful every day to my father and my mother and to my grandpa. Chinese people, we're very, we respect our elders. So like we talked about a few weeks ago when you're in California for the wedding, family values matter because your ancestry is not to maintain my offspring for a legacy. No, it's I want them to appreciate and honor the people that came before you that you share a name with, because you want to make them proud. You want to do the best you can because we've been afforded an opportunity because the sacrifices of the people that came before us. And if you could do that, then you could apply that to the rest of society. So I think family structure is so important. And I wish we do that more here in the United States. God and country is great, but your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, those are people you honor. You visit them in grave. Speaking of which, we have a lunar moon cake festival, 中秋节, coming up next. Just to give you a quick, our audience all know this. This is a big deal. This is almost like the Thanksgiving of Chinese culture, 5,000 years. We eat moon cakes. It's a story of, anyways, a folk tale of the moon, rabbit, all of that. But all these things are just to teach children history and tradition and heritage, and also to give an opportunity to share things together and to remember our ancestors. But either way, what you just read, Jim, I'll go back to this, okay? It's very disheartening. It's, you know, let's be frank. Everyone that watches our show, maybe not everyone, most of them are here in the United States, most probably in Houston. They're here, whether they're first generation, second generation, or eighth generation Americans. They're all here now. Their kids will be here. We will retire here. We will die here.
Yeah.
We don't want this to happen. Because we will be long dead when this comes true. Because I look at it and say, a lot of our folks are saying, we have, by the end of this century, it will not be our dominance anymore. You can see it. That's why I know the fear of China. I see it now, right? But using China, I mean, this leads to our next topic, which we don't have to go there now. You know, what we talked about earlier about China filling the void in Afghanistan and you know, Joint Chiefs of Staff calling. But the fact is, every country has to watch out for their best interests. I don't see what China is doing is wrong. Afghanistan is their border, is their backyard. China is not coming to Mexico or Canada and starting wars and trying to replace the regime. You know, if they are, then we have every right to say these people are, you know, this is their backyard. Of course, they have the vested interest in it. Yeah. We have a vested interest because of the terrorists and because of oil rights and their minerals and whatever it is that are profitable. Is there something wrong with that? No, there's nothing wrong with that. Every country wants to gain for their own good. So, but if you want to discuss Afghanistan, we can. But we want to talk about what this professor wrote about the Athenian, because throughout history, from Athens to Greece we've seen this happen.
Yeah,
we've seen this happen.
Right.
Perhaps it might take a dictator to correct the wrongs.
That's what makes it so powerful. You can show what happened to the Weimar Republic in Germany after World War II. You can show what's happened in Venezuela in the last 15 or 20 years. It repeats. Argentina, about every 20 years, it goes through phases like this. So, but the steps are pretty darn consistent.
So China, with their dictatorship, which is exactly what it is a dictatorship. With China, perhaps that is the only way for them to get here, because China was a third world country up to 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. They were not a threat to us until they're able to pull them out of their historical problems. The problems that the Communist Party inherited was not just created by them. They did create a lot of it, but it was for 2 decades of pillage from everybody, you know, from Western powers, colonization, opium wars, to Hong Kong being written out. Could you imagine us writing Texas away to another country, Rhode Island, Long Island to someone else because we were weak? China had to endure this, and the Communist Party came. You know what's scary, Jim? By the way, we're very, very clear to have a clear perspective, to not be burdened by baggage. Okay, to be fair. What China, they're not a communist, socialism anymore. What they're doing is actually a form of what the Republican Party used to be, or what the Kuomintang KMT in Taiwan was. They believe in economic reform. They believe in wealth for everyone. They believe in private enterprise. What they're doing is trying to build infrastructure and provide and grow as a country. Mm-hmm. The communist part is in their name. I hope they learn from their mistakes, because they made many mistakes in the 60s, 70s, 80s. But this party is not the same. We do not get tied in that box of thinking of them as North Korea or of China from 1970. They are absolutely not. Absolutely. Because their best scholars, the best people that they sent here, used to want to stay here. They don't anymore. Mm-hmm. They go back. Now, we could talk about that later or the next episode, because I think that's a problem for them. This nationalistic pride they're trying to instill, because that could come back and burn them. You know, when you're too nationalistic, when you're all about rah-rah. Mm-hmm. But that is a great sign of people. And also, of course, we're not helping. We're wrongfully prosecuting, investigating professors, scholars during the Trump administration. They're all being exonerated. These are facts. These are facts that there's an abnormal high percentage of Chinese heritage, Chinese Americans being investigated and being ruined, and then apologize later. Oh, we're sorry, you didn't do anything illegal. It's a witch hunt. This is like McCarthyism back, in the 60s and the 50s. This is absolutely the same thing. History repeats. What we're doing was driving them away. We're creating a divide. The reason why we are the strongest country in the West is because we accept everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And we accept everyone. We do not question the rules. We give you the benefit of the doubt. In the United States, we're not a Gestapo country where you're monitored. You have freedom. We trust you. And in turn, if you do something wrong, then, it's the same thing with FINRA or SEC, right? A lot of leeway. Mm-hmm. But if you do wrong, you will be prosecuted at fullest. Mm-hmm. But now it's reversed. Now we're accusing them because of what Trump and the far right-wing folks have instilled in us. Because the judges now, these cases, some of them are ongoing. None of them has stopped. Mm-hmm. None, Jim. Jim, if we have cases of it, I get it. If there's even 10 out of 100 cases, 100 out of 1,000, I will say, you know what? They're spying. But when there are thousands of cases and the successful prosecution rate is less than a few percentage, or they end up charging them with pornography on the work computer, or they charge them with inappropriate, and then when they have to apologize, that's ridiculous. Yeah. We don't talk about it enough. It's not mainstream news. It's Chinese Americans. They don't complain. We don't complain. Yeah. We don't write. We don't know the system. We don't go to the media. Jim, I'm sorry. I'm on a rant. I just feel that what you just said.
What happened in World War II for the Japanese Americans.
Yes. And then you know what people, the pundits, the challengers, the accusers, that are talking down about the United States. We've done many things wrong. But the fact is, we do see the problem with the Japanese internment camp. We apologize for it. Same thing with the anti-Chinese Exclusion Act. There are a lot of wrongs done to a lot of races. But we're always evolving and we're always learning. It's like science, right?
And that what should be the message, that we're always trying to improve.
And we correct. We correct it. Yes. And we put it in history so we can learn that this happened. We don't try to cover it up or maintain a lie.
It needs to come out. A lot of the things that are coming out now about Americans' history with respect to our Native Americans, cowboys and Indians, what under the modern term for that is ethnic cleansing. And it's abhorrent, but we should continue to try. But between now and next week, Jimmy, do me one favor.
Yes, sir.
Make sure that the millennial generation does not take us from apathy to dependence. In other words, let's slow down this process that Mr. Tyler warned us about.
How do we stop the process? That's exactly what I want to know from you, because I feel helpless sometimes. I really feel it. From the mask, from the school being a problem, from the vaccine to this, these are daily things. So this is a quote I saw recently, okay?
Yeah.
When you disagree with science, you're not disagreeing. You're just, not you, okay? I'm saying general. If people are saying, okay, I'm disagreeing with the science with vaccine or the effect of a mask, you're not an disagreement. You're wrong because you're not a scientist. And when the science changes, it's not because they're wrong. Science updates. They discover new things. This pandemic, this virus, we're learning from it. It's not wrong if we tell you, hey, before CDC said this, but not. No, there's no doubt. So if you want to disagree, you're not disagreeing because you have liberty and freedom. You are wrong. You are affecting public health. Herd immunity is not going to work. Mask works, we know that. Vaccine works, we know that. If you disagree, then we'll never get out of this. We'll never get out of this. And the countries that are in a dictatorship, it's very advantageous during a national health issue.
During an emergency.
Yes. And too much, I hate to say this. I don't agree with people saying there's too much freedom. You have too much ability, because of course, never enough. How can we say we're going to give up some? I will never go this and say, hey, I want to give up some of my rights so the government could force me to do this and do that. No, it should be your own damn, excuse my language, prerogative too. But yet we are so divided. Someone like you that I look up to, it's important to see this. You're as conservative as they come. Mm-hmm. But that politics doesn't change the fact on how you distinguish facts and myth, conspiracy and truth. It doesn't discourage you from wanting to do something for the greater good, getting the vaccine, wearing a mask. That has nothing to do with politics.
Yeah. And respecting each other along the way, especially when somebody may disagree with us, you respect them for that. And instead of fighting with them, you either give them the freedom to say and do whatever they want, or you try to persuade them, not conquer them, but persuade them. And the best way to persuade people is with your own actions.
Sir, I cannot agree with you more. And I'm at a lost words. Look, we're running out of time as usual. I would really love to continue this next week.
Let's do. I'll send this again to you, and hopefully some of our listeners, our viewers, will write to you via email and request this, and you can forward it on to them.
Perfect. Jim, I appreciate your time as always. Hope you have a great week.
Thank you, Jimmy. Talk to you next week.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. See you next week.